Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is one of my own. Yes, you know what day it is. It's Friday, it's Fiction Friday, and we have reached episode 40 of my series Worth 1000 Words, where I write a 1000 word short story based on a piece of artwork without an outline. And today we are getting a little hard boiled, and I'm not talking about eggs, okay? So that is the hint that you have today. But before I move on to the story, let's talk about the music. So this was kind of a tricky one because I wanted to find something in the hard-boiled genre that wasn't too jarring, wasn't too intense, and it was tricky to find, but luckily I discovered the soundtrack for the film Brick, directed by Ryan Johnson back when he directed good movies. So if you haven't seen that one, I highly recommend it. It's a great film. Much better than his later entries into cinema, let's say. And this soundtrack had its highs and lows for me. Some of it worked for the writing process, some of it didn't. Just take a listen and check it out and see what you think. So with that said, let us move on and check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Hardboiled, and it is by a concept artist from Lyon, France, named Jules Augy. Pardon my French. Sorry. Terrible joke. Anyway, this one caught my eye because I'm a sucker for hard-boiled stuff. I love noir. I've done one other that is sort of in that vicinity, in that realm, I guess, but this one's a little bit more on the nose. And I think what I liked most about it is this guy. It's like mid-action. He's dropping this. It looks like a crushed can or something. He's got a cigarette in the other hand, and there's a broken glass window. There's some mail coming out of this mail slot on an antique store. What is the story here? I don't know. I really love the stylization of the artwork. It's not super photoreal, but it has this nice. It reminds me a lot of the video game Disco Elysium. But as you see, there's nobody else in the frame. This character is he's walking around this building. I don't know if he's the one who punched the window or what's going on, but that is my job to find out. So this was a great excuse for me to practice my hard-boiled language in fiction. So let's see what I came up with. The sun could have given Grant a closer shave than his razor. Sharp didn't begin to describe it. A hot edge that broiled the empty street. Grant scratched his chin around the nick. Swollen, ready to split. Ruin his new shirt. Ha. 5 years now. Stippled like one of those canvases the urbane bastards gawked at while sipping overpriced juice. Why he bought patterned shirts. Ones without didn't go well in his line of work. Grant toed the sun's edge. Felt that anger through chewed leather and wool socks. That cut worked its way up to his cut. Son of a bitch made his eyes water and the rest of his face needle. A good shave was hard to come by. Fuck if that wasn't a cliche. But the streets were full of them. Long shadows clung to the smell of piss and regret sleeping off what they could. Shame no one respected the streets like he did. Floor to ceiling. The floor starting beneath the street, infested with rats and shit. He put some there himself. The ceiling ending at the stars where he'd seen many of those rats and shits bawl their last wishes, as if they were anything more than smoking bullet holes on a black wall. He dragged a match over the part he always missed under his nose. Sulfur and wood burned. He suppressed a cough, dug out the thing that had led him here. A crushed can. Reno Cola. Never heard of it. The last sip circled the lip as he swirled the can. He sniffed it. Smelled like it should, but not how he wanted. A whiff of tobacco, cologne. Hell, even the grease smears of the steak from a last meal, because it would be. Nobody in the city got up this early. Breakfast was out of the question. The name had led him here. Antique store. Tagged shutters, vomiting mail slot. Windows split into triangles leading to a center that just might have a clue. Grant crossed that moat of hellfire, stopping long enough to look straight into that fiery eye of a source to wink a fuck you in case it thought he had been hiding from it. He planted a foot on the bottom stair, only one more leading to the door that no one respected. Angled his toe up, felt that stretch in his calf, inhaled, deeply. He blew a smoky kiss to his fragmented reflection. Didn't let it all go, snorting the last of it, rolling it around in his mouth, then swallowed. Exhaled nothing. Mail told him nothing. Advertisements with current residents slathering barcoded labels. He dropped one, and it slid beneath the door. Halfway, though, it was thick in the middle, like him. He picked it up, turned it over. Something about the weight of it said more than the anonymity. He grinned around his cigarette at the thought of opening someone else's mail being a federal crime. Pictured those old boys in too short shorts trying to haul him away because the cops had better things to do. He gutted the envelope, let his eyes fall on fresh entrails. He'd read something once about a religion reading entrails, so he honored them. Fucking Romans. A credit card glued to the center, teetering on something more than glue. Raised numbers, a raised name. M. Marshall. Fuck if you didn't hate people who had double initials. Like their parents thought they were clever or something. As if a child was an avatar to fulfill some derivative dream they hadn't been able to. Meanwhile, the child would grow up to be a failure. Get in too deep to nurse that failure. Oh money, oh lives, oh things grander than the dreams of those two pathetic parents who probably thought the world of that sack of shit still. Unaware that he was nothing more than what crawled and festered in the sewer. Where he would soon be, once Grant found him, which would be soon. They liked to use his name when begging. Grant, please this, Grant, please that. Maybe if they said it enough, its literal meaning would manifest into reality, and they'd live another day. Fuck if it would. He wasn't one of those double initial pricks who bent to tears or money. All had offered both. Grant cocked his head, watching his reflection divide, shrink, grow. A shadow painted on the wall across the street with clean lines. He took a drag, which illuminated the hint of a nose, a lipless mouth, hollow face, marred by that one spot he hadn't taken care to prevent. His third eye apparently lived on the side of his cleft chin that was bigger than the other, blocky, pain in the ass to shave. Too many punches or too much of Pops' biological signature. The AC kicked on, rat-a-tatting the tin roof. Grant ducked as if gunshots. His already irregular heartbeat found more irregularity, cigarette tumbling to his feet, sparking cinder pollen, onto something he hadn't noticed. Ignition. He stomped out the fire, picked up the remains. A one-sheet menu. Benny's. The only bar owner who had ever, in all of history, mailed menus. Near blackened on the kids' menu, Grant laughed at that. Just below apple juice was Reno Cola, new. Shame no one respected the streets like Grant did, floor to ceiling. Too bad he'd spent too much time staring at the wall. Could have been sooner, maybe give him enough time to grab a bite. Benny would be opening soon, for him anyway, because old Benny's mitts were all over this. Benny Benson, magnitudes worse than a double initial. Son of himself, son of a bitch. Grant gagged the mail slot again with a thick envelope. Kept the menu. It was a long walk to Benny's from here. He patted his gut. That was all right with him. He tossed the can onto a dog pile of garbage bags, took another drag, rounding the Reno antique store, to pay a visit to a man who was the son of himself. First, you're going to have to forgive me. I had to speed this video up a little bit more because it took me over 2 hours. Yes, 2 hours and I think 6 minutes, 7 minutes, something like that. So I got this at 6 times speed, but considering I wrote pretty slowly comparatively to the other stories I do, maybe it'll feel about right. But anyway, so I chose this one particularly because I thought it was going to be easy. I thought I was going to have fun with the language. And I think that's the first thing that is my regret about this story. And I'll probably talk more about it too. And the final thoughts or consolidate those thoughts is that don't write something specifically for stylistic reasons. At least that could be my, or I should say, do not underestimate them. Because here I thought this was going to be a relatively quick story. It was going to be fun with the language because it is, quote unquote, hard boiled. That's in the title. And I remember the last time I did something that was similar to this, it came easier for me, and I don't know why this one was so difficult this time, but it was. It clearly took me, at least 50% longer than my other ones for the most part. Although I feel like I'm getting longer as I go. But anyway, what's to note about this? It could have been, or my struggles, I should say. It could have been because there's a single person in the frame. There are some nice elements to go off, right? You have the broken window, you have the mail slot that I noticed, you have, tagging on buildings. The streets are interestingly empty, right? Except for this one guy. But outside of that, there weren't many clues for me to hone in on to create a story. The elements I did choose were, as you know, the name of the store, Reno, and then also I used the AC as a device, right, to kind of create some shock. And I don't know, I just saw that and I thought, well, the streets are empty, everything must be very quiet. He's sort of the deep in his thoughts, and so that would be a triggering mechanism for the final resolution. And speaking of resolution, and speaking of conflict, and speaking of all of the storycraft things, I think that is by far the weakest part of this. I really struggled finding a story here. Why this guy was here? Why was he leaving? What or who was he looking for? And that was difficult for me to find. And I finally, I made up who he was looking for. I guess it shouldn't be, I shouldn't describe it that way. I should describe it more in terms of that I had a hard time making it feel compelling, making the scene turn, right? Driving it to the end. And rather than it being at the midpoint, it happened much later. And I think that's okay. I don't think the midpoint has to always happen literally in the middle of a story. I used to think that a lot, but then watching other people analyze films and reading books where they analyze movies, you'll know quickly that yes, maybe that is traditional story structure, or it fits into a wide variety of stories, but that's not always the case. For instance, Taxi Driver by Martin Scorsese, the what a lot of people think the impetus is, it doesn't happen until like 45 minutes into the film, whereas the impetus usually, will happen about 15 minutes into a standard length film. And that is regarded as one of the classics. So I guess, don't get so discouraged with storycraft. I fall into the trap quite often. I'm probably still in that trap as we speak, because I think we're always trying to find the perfect structure. We're always making sure we adhere to a structure, because we're conditioned to think that if we veer from that structure in any way, that it's not going to make a good story. And I don't believe that. I think that yes, there are elements that stories should have, otherwise they may feel empty, they may feel slow, but I don't know that they have to happen at those exact moments. If they do happen at those exact moments, then yes, maybe you will have a more mainstream story structure. Now, if that's your goal, totally cool. I can definitely get behind that. But I find that for my own work, I want to make it, I want it to appeal, but I know that my tastes just in general don't appeal to a wide audience, right? At all. I like more independent stuff, specifically with film. I'm not a fan at all of most, if not all, mainstream film. And I don't know, I like deep storytelling. I like reading and seeing things that feel like they're contributing to the art in such a way that it's beyond surface level. It's showing me something or telling me something that I haven't quite experienced before, or experienced in that way. And I don't think my own stories really, I don't want to consider myself that I'm like Cormac McCarthy or anybody that's doing anything very innovative in the story space, because, maybe someday, decades from now, I'll crack that. But, at the moment, I'm just trying to tell a story that appeals to me, which probably veers away from the mainstream quite a bit. But I don't think I'm not creating any kind of new way of storytelling, and I'm not trying to, right? I want to tell something. I think I want to hit the mark somewhere between mainstream and indie, somewhere in the middle there, not too far to the right, not too far to the left. Not to use the political terms, but That's all I could think of on the top of my head. But with this one, I know another rant. I always rant on these things, but I guess we have time. According to my math, we'll be about 20 minutes in. So I think we're not even quite half there yet. So let's talk about the story a little bit more. So we know we have Grant. There is some elements that, and again, this stuff happens just as you write. And so I highly encourage you sometimes just start writing. Don't even maybe have a premise of where you're going, or just a morsel of story, and just go for it, because you'd be very surprised of what will pop in your head. So for instance, I kind of sat there looking at this picture for a little bit, and I wanted to have a name. Right, I wanted to have a name for this guy that felt like a detective name, like Scully or Mulder. I know there's probably terrible examples. I don't know, Holmes, like Sherlock Holmes, something in that vein, or something that may be a little bit more noir. And I chose Grant. I don't think that is any of those things. I was looking up. I just quickly looked up, hey, what is a good detective name? Because why not? And a lot of them were good, but I didn't want to pick one that I just wanted to kind of get the feeling of what might fit. And but the nice thing is, Grant, it actually worked its way into the story, being like he would grant them their lives, right? And that was an element that just happened. I wasn't even thinking about that when I first named him. I was like, whatever, Grant. Okay, it's Grant. But I loved how that kind of worked its way into the story somehow at some point, and so I think those are the things that, don't concern yourself too much with specifics until you've gone through the draft, because a lot of that will just manifest. And here's another instance. We're looking at M. Marshall. Fuck if you didn't hate people who had double initials. That's part of me. Not that I hate people with double initials, but I think I always find it funny when people have names that just, they're almost like names of a caricature, which I guess a little bit more when we get down to Benny Benson, the barkeep, because that's always made me laugh when you find someone named Eric Erickson, like son of himself. It's just always been something that made me laugh, and I thought that maybe that would give this guy a little bit more character, right? So he has clearly has something with names, right? A double initial. So if you have, if this guy's name is Mike Marshall, or Mitchell Marshall, or whatever, or Mark Marshall, that kind of bothers him, and I think that adds some character. And yeah, obviously that's probably a little bit of me in there because of the name thing that I find kind of funny sometimes. But I twisted a little bit, and I think you can't help but put yourself a little bit into every single character. I think that every single character we write, there's some of us in there because we have to pull that from somewhere, right? It doesn't, it never truly comes from thin air, right? Even if it comes from your subconscious, it's part of you. Even though if you're not consciously thinking of it, or not consciously aware of it, it comes from you. So that's another thing is don't be discouraged about, maybe don't make everything autobiographical with characters, because then that could, you'll run out of ideas very quickly unless you have a particularly interesting life. But I don't know. There's probably, I think there's all of us, and all of our characters. There's a little bit of us in there. But yeah, back to the name thing. I was kind of concerned. You can see if you go back to the clock, I didn't start writing until about 4 minutes in, because I was just, I should have just gone. I always try to name my character, at least I'd say most of the time, not all the time, within the first sentence, within the first couple of sentences. I read somewhere that it's important to start with the character, and I just went with it. It seemed like a good idea just because you know who you're talking about immediately. And I think that's what hung me up, right? Is trying to come up with a name for this guy. And the name I came up with wasn't particularly hard boiled, but it served its purpose, whether or not you agree. But I feel like there was a moment in there that actually added character, which was a pleasant surprise. So let's talk a little bit more about the style, the thing that really got me hung up here. And I think the reason being that this story took me so long, and I'm probably repeating myself. I'm sure I said this toward the beginning, but I'm going to say it again, just in case. I was so fixated on the language. I was so fixated on telling this story from the POV of a guy who lives in this world in that hard-boiled vernacular. I think I did okay here and there. This is by no means, I think, a great entry into the hard-boiled or noir genre, but there's some decent lines in there. Beside that, the fact of the matter is, I was so concerned. I was so fixated on the fact that I needed to make this sound like a detective story that I failed to come up with the actual story. There's a lesson to be had there, and the lesson being always find the story first. Don't worry about superficial things, because if the story works and it's interesting and it feels like it's part of the genre and part of the world you're trying to create, then you, the language won't matter as much. Sure, you're gonna have some critics. You're gonna have some people who think, "Oh man, this did not read like Raymond Chandler or anything like that." Yeah, you're gonna have those people, but if the story's good, if it fits, I really think that's the most important thing. And I learned that here. I learned that you do not want to. This was like style over substance. The fault on my shoulders completely is that I always try to do substance over style. Clearly I didn't heed my own advice, but this is a learning process. So there you go. But it took me a really long time to find out, okay, so this guy approaches the building, goes through some mail. Then I decided he didn't really find anything, or maybe he did find something. But what is leading him? Who's he looking for? Why does he leave? Is he the one who, punched the window or not? That was really the hardest thing for me to find. I just threw out this Benny would be opening soon. So this is before I even connected the fact that Benny would be part of this. I just here's another name thing. Son of himself, son of a bitch. Yeah, I think that I had sort of the framework of it. I don't even want to call it the framework. I had like elements here and there scattered about, but I just didn't have that connective tissue. And I think when I finished it feels okay. I'm not super happy with how it turned out, but I feel like, and like I said, my goal always in these is try to tell a cohesive story. Try to have the five commandments of storytelling, or at least this, close as I can with what I'm working with here. Despite the fact that it's very minimal in terms of the artwork and like the players involved and all that. That's not to say you can't do it. I feel like I've done it better plenty of times before, even with single characters. I don't know. I guess just some of these resonate, or they conjure things in my mind more than others. While I feel like I had an introduction, I was kind of painting the world with words. I created an idea of, obviously this guy's looking for someone, we don't know who. He finds this document in the mailbox that gives him a name, but then he gets another name that leads him to somebody else. So, presumably this guy was sent here to look for somebody. He's like a hitman or a fixer or something like that. And he's just going about his day. One thing I really liked about this is that there's nobody else in the street, right? You have these long shadows cast by the sun. And there's something really interesting because it looks like a relatively, this would be a pretty busy street, I feel like normally, specifically the area on the right. And he's by himself. And I think that I use the can as a device, right? That was sort of the element that clued the reader in, or it was like his initial clue. I thought it would be interesting if he just, that signified him moving on. He didn't need it anymore. It served its purpose, and he's going about the rest of his investigation. The more I look at this, the more I think about it, and again, this happens every time. What if he's the one who punched the window? What if he's the one who? I mean, maybe he left. Maybe he killed somebody in this antique store and is leaving. But another thing I try to do too is I try not to veer too far from the painting. I try not to, and I've done it before, but I'm saying I try not to. I want to keep at least most of what you're seeing, the story regarding most of the characters and the places you're seeing. I don't want to like step too far away from it. I know I did it that one time a lot in the God, I can't even remember, the Laundry's Done, I think, where the two guys are they're like hitman or something, and they go to this laundromat to clean a shirt, and that's really all you see is a laundromat. But I had the story start outside the laundromat. So I don't know, maybe that would have helped here. But again, I don't like to remove the reader too far from the painting, because I feel like that's starting to be, it's kind of counterintuitive to the purpose of the exercise, I think, is to try to take this as a snapshot, keep everything relatively the same, more or less. Use the element that you see as either a beginning, a middle, or an end, meaning a crucial part of the story, and leave it at that. But yeah, you can see I'm clocking up. I haven't even hit 2 hours yet, and I go over. So I know I said this in the last one, but these never seem to get easier. And I don't know, maybe I'm getting rusty. Maybe my brain is being completely drained of all the ideas. I don't know. I do like the fact that I'm not very happy with these the more I write them. And I know that that seems like a terrible thing, but um, I like to fail. I think it's important to fail. Now, do I think this is a complete failure? No, I don't think this is like an incoherent story. I don't think anything like that. But there's some others that I've written that I've been much more happy with, and so I think, you need to fail every once in a while, because when you fail, that gives you pause, that allows you to slow down and think and analyze, why you failed, and hopefully take that information and that knowledge into your next work. So, but yeah, part of this, as I said, was, I think it was style over substance. At least that's what I was really focusing on. I was so concerned with the line by line work, and I shouldn't have been. I really shouldn't have been. But I think it was also because I thought it was going to be easy. Yeah, as if this is ever easy. But unfortunately, here we are, finally wrapping up. Yeah, this was tough too from an editing standpoint, because to get the word count down, I'd remove lines that I didn't think I needed, but then that would bring me too far down, sub 1,000, and then yeah, this one was another one of those that was really tough to do in terms of keeping the word count accurate. You can see me just waffling back and forth right here as I wrap it up. Down 10 words, over 3 words. But I eventually get it, and hit 1,000. Yeah, going up and down the document, you can see that. Up and down, up and down, up and down, removing, going back. And I don't know why, it's funny how sometimes this is more difficult than other times. Now, one word. I need one word. Hunting for it. Hunting. Oh, now I need 2, because I think 2 is easier than 1, which it is. I feel like more words are easier, and then I go over 1. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe a little bit of what I learned during this process. So let's start with the good. So the good in this story, if you didn't listen to my analysis in the prior section of this video, I talked about that there were some interesting character moments that popped up, specifically with the character named Grant, using it to create characterization, as well as some of the language. I don't feel like I completely nailed the hard-boiled fiction lingo. There's some lines in there that I think are serviceable. So I know, a short list of good things, right? Well, I mean, I guess I told a coherent story, but I don't think I'd be making a video about it if I didn't. But I probably should, no matter where I end up. So let's talk about some of the bad things. So this one took way too long. It took me over 2 hours to do, and that's beyond what I like to do in this. I feel like that becomes a more comfortable time limit. It's something where it just teeters right on the edge of problematic storytelling. And what I mean by that is that when you try to race to the finish, that's when all the great subconscious stuff happens. When you kind of are muddling around and messing around with the words and story and all that, it just drags on and it drags on and drags on. And I don't feel like that's really when the good stuff happens. And clearly here I struggled. And particularly what I struggled with was finding not so much a reason why this guy was here, but what was going to be interesting in him leaving, like painting the picture that you see, him rounding the corner of this antique store, tossing that can aside. Where was he going? What was he doing here? And hopefully make it feel like a chunk in a story that just really made sense. Now, obviously, none of these are going to be complete stories. They're moments in time. So as complete as I can get, I guess a complete moment, a complete scene. And the turning point in this was very far down the page. It was very much toward the end, a lot farther than I like to do. As you know, if you've listened to any of these before, I like to create the midpoint to where things start revving up the action. It starts going toward the ending. Then I can feel like you can create a solid act 3, act 4, however you decide to structure your stories, and then have a nice little cliffhanger that does have some closure, but then opens up the story, or at least allows it to continue. But the moral of this story, my friends, if you did not listen to the analysis, because I did talk about it there, but I will repeat myself for those of you who didn't, is that I fell victim to one of the worst things you can possibly do in any form of art, any form of anything you do in life, and that is form over function. Yes, that is being too concerned about how something looks, how it sounds, instead of really what matters, and that's the heart of what it is, right? It's the subject matter, it's the content of the story, it's the heart of the piece. But I really tried hard to make this language sound hard-boiled or noir. And I really got caught up with that. And I think I lost sight of the actual story. And I'm willing to bet that's what caused me so much trouble, is that right out of the gate, I was trying to make this sound clipped and darker and kind of offbeat, like a lot of those detective novels are. And before I knew it, I was getting toward the end, or at least halfway, and I really didn't have much of a story. And so if you can learn one thing from this video, it is don't worry about the line by line stuff right in the beginning. I do it all the time, and I'm really trying my best, everything I write, to not concern myself much about it. It's easier to do in longer form stuff because you know you're going to go back and edit it and edit and edit it. But in this one, in this series, there's not a whole lot of editing, right? I just kind of do a second pass, maybe a third pass, just to kind of briefly look for typos and grammatical things and maybe clean up some story details. So I'm guessing that's why I decided to dig too deep too early. But it was fun delving into this genre. It was a challenge, and all of these should be challenging. I really hope that I learn something each and every time I do this, venturing into different genres, different styles, not only of line by line work, but storytelling and characterization and even language. And I hope you learned something, or found a little bit of enjoyment, or maybe I gave you something to think about in your own writing. So thanks for sticking with me for this extra long video. I tried to speed it up during the analysis, but it's probably going to be longer than the rest. And keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.